All right, welcome, focus learners, to this explainer. We're diving headfirst into an absolutely incredible story today. We're going to track the meteoric rise, the dazzling, blinding glory, and then the tragic, completely hollowed-out fall of the Mughal Empire. We'll unpack how a desperate refugee, literally just executing a plan B to survive, managed to lay the groundwork for an empire that changed the world, only for the whole thing to magnificently collapse from the inside out.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Just consider the staggering irony for a second. Imagine being the very last scion of a bloodline that once ruled the absolute wealthiest empire on the planet. I mean, your ancestors literally watched the British bow and scrape just to beg for basic trade permits. But then, look at the reality for Bahadur Shah Zafar, the final Mughal emperor. He ends up standing before those exact same foreigners begging for his own life. It's just a staggering reversal of absolute power. But to really understand how we got to this tragic, pathetic end, we've got to rewind and look at how it all started.
Chapter 1. A Desperate Foundation.
So, the story of the mighty Mughals actually kicks off with the tears of a defeated prince named Babur. Now, he was a direct blood descendant of the legendary conquerors Genghis Khan and Timur. But paradoxically, Babur was kind of a serial loser. He lost his dream city of Samarkand and was forced out of his own homeland 3 separate times. In his personal diary, the Tuzk-e-Baburi, he wrote this incredibly relatable entry, describing himself as just wandering around like a ball. You see, taking India wasn't some grand childhood dream of conquest. By 1526, it was a desperate plan B. He was basically a homeless refugee who needed a country just so he could survive.
Now, what's really interesting about this massive disadvantage is just how terrifying it was. When Babur finally shows up in India at the historic Battle of Panipat, he is outnumbered at least 3-1 by the Sultan's forces. Conventional logic says his story absolutely should have ended right there in the dirt.
But here's the thing. He brought a real game-changer with him, a technology India had literally never seen before: gunpowder. When Babur's cannons thundered for the very first time, the deafening roar completely panicked the Sultan's heavily armored war elephants. These terrified beasts just turned right around and trampled their own troops. I mean, in just half a day, the entire fate of India was completely decided.
But here's the ultimate historical punchline. Babur was entirely a reluctant conqueror. Despite winning this massive, unbelievably wealthy subcontinent, he was actually totally miserable there. He went on the record complaining that he hated the Indian weather, he couldn't stand the food, and he wasn't exactly fond of the people either. And yet, despite hating the whole setup, he successfully laid the foundation of a mega empire. A foundation, by the way, that his son, Humayun, very nearly threw in the garbage. Humayun's reign reads like a dark comedy. He was a really soft-hearted guy who'd much rather gaze up at the stars than sit down and study military strategy. So unsurprisingly, he gets kicked out of India for 15 long years by a brilliant strategist named Sher Shah Suri. Eventually, Humayun manages to scrape together some help from the Safavid Empire and wins his throne back. But then, get this, just 6 months later, he suffers a terribly ironic demise by tripping and falling to his death down the stairs in his own library.
Chapter 2. The Golden Zenith.
Okay, so with Humayun's sudden, tragicomic death, the entire survival of this fragile empire falls squarely under the shoulders of a 13-year-old boy named Akbar. And Akbar? He turns out to be an absolute political genius. He realized incredibly quickly that you can't truly rule India just by occupying it as an outsider. So, step 1, he trades the sword for what he called the dagger of politics. Step 2, he marries Rajput princesses, which was a brilliant move because it turned fiercely independent local warriors into his most loyal protectors. And step 3, he actually tried to invent a brand new religious cocktail, the Din-e-Ilahi, to unite his wildly diverse subjects. It was a fascinating, massive push for social integration, even if it totally ruffled the feathers of the traditional religious structures at the time.
Building on that stability, under Akbar and his successors, Jahangir and Shah Jahan, the empire hits a level of staggering opulence that literally made European kings drool with envy. Jahangir set up this incredible chain of justice, an actual chain that any regular citizen could pull to demand an audience with the emperor. And Shah Jahan? Well, he cemented the magnificent visuals we still associate with India today. We're talking the breathtaking Taj Mahal, the colossal red fort built for 50,000 people, and a solid gold jewel-encrusted Peacock Throne that took 7 entire years just to construct.
So, the crucial point is understanding the sheer unfathomable scale of Mughal power under Shah Jahan. That 1 in 4, that means he ruled over a state that contained nearly a quarter of the entire global population. It was the absolute pinnacle of human art, wealth, and influence at the time.
Chapter 3. Termites in the Woodwork.
And a quick warning here, the highest peak is always the beginning of the fall.
See, while the royals were utterly distracted, completely obsessed with their art and their endless wealth, they made what seemed like a minor, almost throwaway diplomatic error. But it was fatal. They allowed a British ambassador named Thomas Roe to establish trade. The Mughals were so secure in their vast wealth that they completely misjudged the British East India Company. Without realizing it, they essentially invited in the very termites that would spend the next couple of centuries eating their mighty empire from the inside out.
But the British weren't their only problem. The Mughals were busy destroying themselves through a classic trap known as strategic overstretch. Objectively defined, this is when an empire expands its military and territorial commitments way beyond its actual economic and political capacity to maintain them. And this trap perfectly caught the last great emperor, Aurangzeb, who pushed the empire's borders to their absolute territorial maximum.
And this brilliantly illustrates the cost of that overstretch. Aurangzeb spent the last 26 years of his life completely bogged down, fighting these endless, grueling wars in South India, totally isolated from his capital. The direct result was an absolute disaster. The treasury rapidly drained dry to fund these campaigns, while completely unchecked corruption just rotted out the core of his administration up in the unguarded north.
Chapter 4: The Hollow Trees Fall. Now we enter the final, tragic chapter.
By the time Aurangzeb finally died in 1707, the empire looked magnificent on the outside, but it was completely hollowed out on the inside. The immediate aftermath of his death was defined by a brutal, bloody reality, the law of the jungle. It was either the throne or the funeral. Vicious internal civil wars erupted over succession. Instead of manning the borders and protecting the realm, the absolute best, most elite Mughal soldiers were busy slaughtering each other just to secure the crown.
And you know what happens when you fight amongst yourselves? You leave the front door wide open. In 1739, the Persian king Nader Shah essentially waltzed right into Delhi. With the Mughal forces totally depleted and disorganized, Nader Shah ruthlessly looted everything that had been built over generations. He stripped the entire city bare, even carrying off Shah Jahan's legendary Peacock Throne and the priceless Koh-i-Noor diamond. Just to put into perspective the sheer, unimaginable volume of wealth he looted, look at this number, 3. That is the number of years Nader Shah did not have to tax his own people in Iran after coming back from Delhi. Think about that. He plundered so much accumulated Mughal wealth that he completely funded his entire empire for 3 whole years without collecting a single coin from his own citizens. From there, tracking the final days of the empire is just pathetic. First, these once mighty rulers were reduced to mere pensioners, literally collecting an allowance from the British East India Company. Then came the totally failed uprising in 1857, which handed the British the perfect excuse to act. And this brings our narrative full circle, right back to the beginning, as they took the very last king, Bahadur Shah Zafar, and exiled him to Burma forever. So the Mughals may be gone, but their legacy is literally everywhere. We inherited their DNA, their language, their food, and their incredible architecture. But I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Did we also inherit the Mughal virus? I mean, that fatal flaw of choosing strong, charismatic personalities over building strong, lasting institutions? Just think about our modern political choices today. Well, if you found this deep dive into the massive oops moments of history fascinating, make sure you smash that subscribe button, hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next explainer, and drop a comment below right now. Which Mughal fact absolutely blew your mind today? Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.